Yo,
Exactly.
I guess you'd say this ain't my first startup. Would that be the equivalent?
Well, my wife's business partner is from North Carolina, so I get a lot of y'alls every day. So I think I can keep up.
But if you need a translator for my southern accent, Tom can do it.
All right.
I've lived in the South my whole life as well. Is she
Yeah,
from North Carolina? Your wife?
No, my wife is from the Bay Area, but her partner is from North Carolina, and actually my investment partner is from Texas. So I'm an honorary member of the South.
So you know good barbecue.
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm held in contempt by both my wife and my
Oh,
business
yeah,
partner,
that's not
and my
right.
children. My wife is Samoan, so on my first visit to Samoa, they gave me some beef, and my wife said, "Oh, he's vegetarian," so they brought me some chicken.
You got to be kidding. That's beautiful. All right, so we are. We are 1 minute out, and the room is starting to fill.
Nice.
You a baseball fan? A's or Giants?
Giants.
Yeah. You going to get to see any games this year, you think?
No, not in person, but on TV, it's good enough for the little while more it lasts.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to last much longer, sadly.
No.
You could send a cardboard stand-in.
Yeah, I'm waiting for mine. We have tickets to the Giants game, so I uploaded mine about 2 weeks ago. Supposedly in the next week, I have my dog, one of my beagles in a face mask, and one of my cats. So we'll see if they do it.
All right, folks, we are going to get ready to get started here. Welcome to the 12th installment of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been a fan of Who Knew over the last 5 years, or a fan of the Smartest People in the Room series for the past 12 weeks, then you understand what our mission is. For the uninitiated, we shine a light on people and movements that deserve it. We favor people who are doing really cool work that makes a difference in society. And today's program underscores that point to a T. Today, I am thrilled to be broadcasting from the W.O. Smith School in Nashville. This amazing school is one of those things that just makes so much sense and richly deserves your attention and support. The W.O. Smith Nashville Community Music School has provided music education to thousands of low-income children who otherwise would not have been able to afford instruction since 1984. Named for the late music professor and noted jazz bassist William Oscar Smith, the school makes quality music instruction available to children ages 7 through 18 from low-income families for the cost of 50 cents per lesson. Think about that, 50 cents a lesson. More than 200 volunteer teaching artists provide instruction to over 500 children annually. W.O. Smith offers a variety of coursework, including audio production, songwriting, music business studies, to name just a few. Students can borrow instruments, music, technology, and learning materials at no additional expense. For information on how to volunteer or to donate, please visit their website, wosmith.org. Thank you for supporting them. Before we get started, let me take care of a little bit of business, and that is I want to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors, without their support, we couldn't do what we do. First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, Create Tennessee and the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Four Roses Bourbon, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. I appreciate all their support. Last item of business is please engage with us in the chat. In other words, everyone in the audience, feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, introduce yourself. I will be monitoring the chat and will field the questions and share them with both Beverly and with Dave. Speaking of Beverly and Dave, listen to that. Let me tell you a little bit about these two rock stars. Today's host is one of my favorite rabble-rousers, Beverly Keel. Just as the late Congressman John Lewis liked to talk about making good trouble, Beverly's been doing that for years. Beverly is the Dean of the MTSU's College of Media and Entertainment, as well as a women's rights activist and award-winning music journalist whose work has appeared in People magazine, Parade, The Tennessean, and many other publications. In 2014, she joined forces with Tracy Gerson and Leslie Fram to create Change the Conversation, which has become an influential movement in the area of gender equality in country music. In 2020, she became co-founder of Nashville Music Equality. Forbes included her on its national list of 40 women to watch over 40, a group of innovative women recognized for disrupting industry and society. She was inducted into the Source Hall of Fame for Female Music Leaders in 2019. She served as an executive producer on the TV show Iconic Women of Country in 2020. She also serves as publicist for Jamie Johnson and has been a consultant for various projects and artists such as Alison Krauss, Lionel Richie, and Scotty McGeary. She has hosted album launch events for artists including Don Henley and Barry Gibb. What a portfolio of artists you've supported, Beverly. That's amazing. She's been a professor at MTSU since 1995 and was previously chair of the Department of the Recording Industry. She returned to MTSU in 2013 after a leave of absence to serve as Senior Vice President of Artist and Media Relations at Universal Music Group in Nashville, where she was responsible for the media campaigns for artists including Lionel Richie, Vince Gill, Sugarland, Shania Twain, George Strait, and many more. A former music industry columnist for the Nashville Scene and the Nashville Banner newspapers, her journalism has received awards from the Associated Press and the Association of American News Weeklies. She received the Charlie Lamb Award for Excellence in Country Music Journalism for her work as a columnist at the Tennessean. She is also the past president of the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, US. A graduate of Leadership Music, Leadership Middle Tennessee, and Leadership Nashville, she's on the boards of the Country Music Association, the Recording Academy, YWCA, and the W.O. Smith School of Music, where I'm sitting, Owl's Hill Sanctuary, and I'll Fly Away Foundation. She is an editorial board member of the Journal of Popular Music Studies and a member of the International Women's Forum. Keel's been inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Nashville Music Business Women in Music City Awards, where she was recently honored for the 7th consecutive year. She was inducted into the Metro Nashville Public Schools Hall of Fame in 2015 and named one of the YWCA's 2016 Academy for Women of Achievement honorees. She was included in 2016's annual Music City Impact Report by Variety magazine, which profiles the top artists and executives in Nashville entertainment today. A Nashville native, she earned her bachelor's degree in mass communications from MTSU and her master's degree from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Beverly, that is one heck of a resume, and I know I left out some of the parts of it.
Well, now that you put everybody to sleep, introduce Dave.
Mine only took about 20 seconds.
Today's featured guest is Mr. Dave Pell. Now, our audience may not have been hip to Dave prior to today, but after learning more about him and his wickedly funny daily blog, you're going to thank me. 2 years ago, one of my close friends made me aware of Dave and his blog, Next Draft. This is a daily look at the day's most fascinating news, a newsletter with more than 130,000 followers. Dave's writing has appeared in Time, Wired, NPR, Forbes, Gizmodo, and other publications. He was an early internet addict and advised dozens of Silicon Valley startups as a very successful angel investor with over 20 years of experience. You can download the Next Draft app via the App Store, or you can sign up for his daily email or both. Regardless of how you access his writing, you will be more well-informed, enlightened, and smarter for doing so. It is my pleasure to welcome Beverly Keel and Dave Pell to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, Beverly.
Hey, Dave, as we say in the South.
Hey.
So tell everybody first where you are, and you're working from home, which is where?
Yeah, I'm working from home in Sausalito, in my man cave. I have 2 kids, 2 cats, and 2 beagles, so I'll warn in advance that we may not be alone for long.
Well, I'm excited about this talk today. because I really see you as a superhero of the internet age. Much like Clark Kent or Miley Cyrus, you lead a double life. I should say Hannah Montana. You lead a double life. So one part of the day you are an angel investor, venture capitalist, changing people's lives and making a lot of money investing in companies. But your real passion, it seems, is your other alter ego, which is being a seeker of truth and news, scouring the internet, going down rabbit holes to tell us what we should know. So first of all, back in the days when we could go out and you'd go to a cocktail party and you'd introduce yourself and somebody say, tell us what you do. What would you say?
Well, I would always lead with my writing. So I always would tell people that I write a newsletter on the day's most fascinating news. And then I would stop there and not say anymore. And then my wife would push me aside and say, he's an idiot. He doesn't know how to market himself. Let me tell you about this. But I've been lucky in that my investment stuff has always been with a partner or partners who have much bigger brands in the investment world than I do. So I've always been free to sort of brand myself with my more, I guess, meaningful passion for me, which is my writing. So I almost never would mention, unless it was a startup at the cocktail party, I probably wouldn't even bring up the part about investing.
So tell us how you put together the next draft every day. When do you start? What is the process? Is there a deadline when you have to be finished?
I try to finish it by about 1 Pacific time so that it gets people before they're used to be going home from work on the East Coast. Now that doesn't matter as much, of course, but it's pretty much a 24-hour-a-day thing where I'm always looking for news on Twitter and collecting stuff. But the actual times that I really lock in on it, I probably do an hour every night and sort of collecting some stuff that I might want to think about a little bit more for the next day for a lead story or something I want to have a longer take on. And then during the actual day when I'm writing it, I do about 2 hours looking for stories and 2 hours writing. So about 9 to 1.
And tell me, are you a journalist? Are you a thought leader? Are you a charismatic aggregator? How do you describe what you do with a little humor thrown in on the side?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I probably would be described most as a curator and less as a journalist. I guess the thing I really think of myself as, though, is a columnist. I don't know if you remember the show 8 is Enough from back in the day.
Yeah.
That dad on 8 is Enough was actually based on a real journalist. And I always growing up thought he had my dream job. One day he would write about some political issue and the next day he would write about one of his kids that got his girlfriend pregnant. And I thought that would be so cool to be able to write about whatever topic you were passionate about or worried about that day. So I would probably describe what I do as a modern day column. I think if the column had been invented today, it would be a series of takes, sort of Herb Cain-like takes, and have links off to places where you can find more information. So that's sort of my goal. Some of it is more curation and aggregation where I'm just giving you a quote and linking off. But the top part of the newsletter especially is more my take on the day, basically.
So this has really become a monster. So how was the monster born and how has it grown?
Yeah, well, the monster is probably me, and the newsletter does pretty well. But I am definitely a lifelong news addict. Both of my parents are Holocaust survivors. My dad was a partisan in World War II and actually has a book written about him. So he had a pretty amazing life. And my mom also. So this was our topic, basically, instead of talking about the normal, how was your day stuff that normal families I perceived were having conversations about, or throwing a ball in the backyard. We sort of threw news topics back and forth like a couple of cable news anchors. And so news has just always been a huge sort of bonding area, especially for me and my dad. And we talk about it to the exemption of other things. Also, it's partly a repression thing, I think. But we talked about it when I was 14. We talked about it when I was in college, and we still talk about it now. So when I go over to visit my parents, my dad is 96, and we have our socially distanced visit in the backyard. It's right into Trump and everything else. I brought my son, who's 14 to visit my parents the other day, and he got an hour on Putin from the Yalta meetings after World War II to the present. So he got a little taste of my childhood.
Looking back, were there books and magazines scattered everywhere throughout your house?
I mean, there were definitely newspapers everywhere. And once CNN came and news was on, that was there. But it was always through the filter, always through their filter, really, that we didn't just take the news, we analyzed it and talked about the individual personalities that I think, especially as a kid, it's hard to realize that these little personality quirks that people have, even at the highest rungs of society or government, have such a huge impact on history and on current events. And you think of them as sort of these otherworldly people, I think, when you're young. But my dad was really good at saying, no, here's why this guy is saying this. Here's why, his predictions are incredible. A friend of mine works at the Pentagon, and he's always joking that they should try to get my dad to come out and tell them what's next, because he's always been pretty dead on about world events. But I always liked that way of thinking about it. We're actually watching the Civil War, Ken Burns' Civil War documentary with my kids because they've been really into the Black Lives Matter movement on TikTok and Snapchat. So we figured they should know more of the story. And even in that, you look and you see these huge personality quirks or different leadership styles that may have cost 100,000, 200,000 lives in either direction and were so impactful, as opposed to just these big waves of history. In the end, it's just people.
And you, I read, when you were young, you would write lots of pages and give to your friends.
Yeah, I was like an irritating friend. I was waiting for the internet. I used to write about a 30 to 40 page update on my life with jokes and takes or whatever. Sort of like a extra bad version of those holiday things people send out with what's up with their family. And, but only me, a narcissistic view of that. And yeah, so I would bind them and I would send them to all my friends, and it was my little publishing empire. But once the internet came, I'm like, oh, this is great for me. And my friends are like, oh, thank God, this is even better for us.
So why didn't you pursue writing as a full-time career early?
You know, it's weird. I have been writing my entire adult life. I was an English major in college. From the day I started stuff on the internet, I was writing about it. And I've always been writing about the intersection of tech and real people. So it has always been my passion and my main focus. Yeah, it really is. It's weird to say, but the investing stuff is really more of my side gig. It's always been my main focus. Even when I get into startup deals, mostly the people are interested in pitching me or talking to me because they either read my tech writing or Next Draft.
So let's talk about.
I'm working on a book right now, so hopefully I can finally, a late bloomer, finally fully brand as a writer.
What's the book about?
The book is generally about this crazy year, but more from the perspective of what it feels like to be on the receiving end of this news deluge.
So you go down these, rabbit holes every day for our sake, letting us know what's important. How do you not let it get you down?
Yeah, that's interesting you asked that, because that's definitely the most common question that I get from both my friends and readers. I actually get less down about it probably than the average person, because I can instantly professionalize it. It's funny, I used to be a sports reporter, and I didn't get nearly as sad after a loss when I was a sports reporter as I do now as just a regular fan, because I immediately had something to do with it. The day was really more about, what am I going to do, tell the story of this game. And that's really how it is for the news stuff too. I think I would be more depressed and more sort of exhausted by it if I didn't have to wake up every day and say, like, how can I take this terrible news or upsetting news and turn it into something meaningful? So I see my job as making you feel something, and that lets me deflect off me feeling something.
Well, what has the Next Draft taught you about yourself?
I mean, it's taught me that I maintain this sort of family childhood disease of not wanting to have interactions that deal with real emotions like affection and sadness, and instead just bury myself into the news and focus on those topics. I think it's probably a little bit of a sickness, but it's a sickness that others benefit from. So it's not too bad as addictions go.
How and when did you know you'd found your voice as a writer?
Well, I knew it very early, but then my wife and friends told me, no, you're actually wrong. You haven't. So I used to, when I first started Next Draft, or shortly thereafter, I would write every day, and it was pretty good and pretty popular, but it didn't really quite have my natural voice, which is the hardest thing I think about writing, is how do you get your speaking voice or your personality into words. And so my friend and my wife at the time, this is a long time ago, said, you know, you're so inhibited in your writing, you should just let loose and just be the same person you are when we're sitting home having a few drinks or whatever, and just cut loose. You know, that's what makes it fun. And you should swear also, because you swear 24/7 at home in front of our kids and everywhere else. You should swear in your writing too, because that's your voice. So the next day I called somebody a jackass and made another comment like that. And my friend and my wife said, that's it. You found your voice, dude. This is you. And my mom emailed me 5 seconds later and said, I really don't think it's necessary to use this kind of language in your writing. This just shows a weakness that you can't come up with a better way to use language to do this than using those swear words. So in the long run, I think my mom had to give in.
Well, let's have a little conversation interruption to take a few questions from the audience. First of all, does Next Draft have an RSS feed?
It does have an RSS feed. I would have to look that up somewhere to find out exactly what it is. Actually, if you go to the site and you click on the head at the bottom of the site, there's a head logo under there. You'll see the little link to an RSS. I have a blog. I have RSS. It's an Apple News. It's a newsletter and an app.
All right. Michael Kaufman just wants to say, kudos, Dave. Appreciative of your work, curation, point of view, a longtime reader. And then Paul S. asked, I'm curious what Dave thinks of the effects of Facebook on the news, and any comments on the mental health impact of the Facebook news feed.
Sure. Yeah, that's a big question. I'll try to narrow it down to a few takes. Interestingly, today I'll be linking to a story that I've been hoping somebody would write for a long time. The number one complaint I get from readers is, in the last 5 years or so, is that a lot of my links go to paywalled sites. And I understand why the news had to do the paywalls, and I'm glad that they're succeeding. Obviously, we need more news sites succeeding, not fewer. But there is this weird conundrum or paradox right now where news that's more accurate or true often has a paywall, and the conspiracy theories and lies that are free, are on Facebook, are free. So somebody wrote an article today that I'll be linking to in today's issue, but that's a huge factor, I think. But yeah, I think Facebook's deflection on this issue has really gotten tired over the last few years. And I'm so happy to see groups like Stop Hate for Profit and other, actually even more so, employees within the company starting to complain about this. It's really about self-interest. I mean, Facebook is most afraid of being broken up, basically, or being hit with antitrust legislation. So the best thing to do is not to rock the boat with who's ever in power. So today that means not removing lies from Facebook. Tomorrow that could mean, in November or January, that could mean removing lies. But it's so damaging. It's so terrible. Every time you bang your head against the wall and think, how can people be seeing what's happening in America and not be totally disgusted and furious and just sick about it, regardless of their politics? You know, Next Draft wasn't even political when I first started it. It's only during this era, you know, that I felt like there was no choice. But when you're banging your head against the wall, you have to realize a lot of people in a lot of places aren't seeing anything that you're seeing. They're seeing these invented stories, these made up stories. So Facebook is a real frustration. I don't know a good fix for it because they're so powerful. I mean, the tech companies are the new nation states. I thought it was sort of funny when the congressional panel was interviewing or sort of trying to hammer the big tech CEOs the other day. I mean, those guys have 10x power of any congressperson. and they influence so many more people. But it's really been sad to see specifically social networking, which in the earliest days of the internet, we really thought would change the world in a positive way and create this layer of transparency. And hey, no dictator is going to be able to get away with their murdering anymore because the world will see what's happening and democracy is going to flourish and political movements are flourish. And it's not just that that didn't quite happen. The exact opposite happened. It's been totally weaponized and it's really, really upsetting. That said, we tend to attack the people who will at least listen to us when we're having political debates. So as much as I'm angry at Facebook or worried about Facebook, I think Fox News is probably a 10x problem.
Do you see something down the line? You know, you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Is there a next platform you see emerging that will become, you know, a voice of America?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm more optimistic that internal and external pressure on those companies will get them to have a little bit more respect for, it's not just the truth. I mean, it's democracy. I don't necessarily blame Mark Zuckerberg personally for not making the right decisions on this. It's more of a structural situation where Mark Zuckerberg should not be the most powerful political voice in America and maybe the world, but he is. And these things have just grown out of control. It's just too much power and too many people in one company. So I'm not, for the same reason, I'm not optimistic about other platforms moving in and taking their place. Even look at TikTok is, you know, sort of erupting now, and everybody from the White House to startups to the big tech companies is doing everything they can do to sort of stop that and not let a non-American company compete. So that's about business as much as it is about messaging. There's no way, I'm as worried about Chinese ownership of TikTok as anybody. I have a lot of friends, or not a lot, but a few friends in the CIA and the Pentagon who have told me for years, don't let your kids use TikTok. The information is at risk. But the idea that TikTok is more of a risk to America today than Facebook is a complete joke.
Well, you are one of the experts of the internet. You were one of the early investors. How did you get it? You were investing, you know, in the early 90s. First of all, how and why did you start investing then? And how were you able to survive when so many of that first generation of companies and investors crashed and burned?
Yeah, no, I mean, many of my investments crashed and burned. That first bust was unbelievable. It was pretty amazing because you'd go from going to dinner parties and people would be saying like, oh my God, you know, so-and-so, you met this person, you've met with this company. And it was like you were a rock star during the first boom. It was fun. I mean, it wasn't just about money. It was just about that you could build something and touch 1 million people. But man, overnight, you'd go to a dinner party and they'd be like, oh, you're on the internet, man, that must be rough, dude. So I definitely got hurt. I got into it originally because I just had a small stock portfolio that I managed for my 3 sisters and I. And a friend of mine was at a law firm, childhood friend of mine was at a law firm that was the first firm to really start representing startups. So I said, hey, maybe I can invest in those instead so I can actually know the people instead of just investing in a public company. And so he said, you should do it. I said, all right, I'll do Google, Hotmail, and Yahoo. And he said, you're too late for those, imbecile, but here's another company you could talk to. And it sort of went from there.
Well, let's talk about some of your investments. Grubhub, Marin Software, Hotel Tonight, Liftopia, Automatic. What were the ones that exceeded your expectations, and what are some that didn't do well, and why?
Well, Grubhub is definitely the one. I don't know if it exceeded their expectations, but that was definitely my biggest one, from it just being 2 guys in the business plan and a few restaurants delivering in Chicago to what it is now. So that's been really fun to watch that whole thing. Probably the most disappointing ones were actually ones that took place during that got hit by the bust. I had one company that I worked with called Productopia that was really similar to what the Wirecutter is now. I don't know if you know the Wirecutter. New York Times bought them. They just give you the 3 or 4 best choices in any product category.
Ah.
And it always bothered me about the internet, and it still bothers me that you see a headline that says, here's the 18 headphones that are best for travel. And it's like, what am I going to do with 18 headphone choices? That's not really narrowing it down much. It's like, just give me the best headphones for travel, the 3 best to choose from. Here's one if you want to spend the most, here's the best budget, and here's the best in between. So that was really a company that was, I think would have been huge today. And it was sort of like the Wirecutter, but a little bit more fun and graphical. So that would have been nice. But yeah, in that, you can't really think about those old deals in this business.
So if I come to you with a deal that I'd like you to invest in my company, what are things you look for or questions you ask?
Well, I usually co-invest with a guy who's very good at spreadsheets, business, legal, revenue, all the big market size, all the huge, big questions investor usually get. And I'm just really more good on the person. So we'll end a meeting and he'll say, I think we should do it. And I'll say, dude, that guy has body parts in his freezer. How can you not see that? So that it's 99% the person, but you don't really have a meeting unless you're pretty sure that the company is a good idea, it fits a need, and that there's a big enough market. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the meeting. So from then on, it's really right from the beginning. I probably know 10 minutes in if there's a chance I'm going to do it or not.
Okay. I'm afraid to think what your first impression of me is.
It's going great so far. I'm
All
already.
right, so let's take another break to get some audience questions from Paul S. Given your high altitude overview, what do you think is the likelihood of a viable election in November?
Well, everybody I know who's not, this is not just a media story. Even people I know who work at think tanks and nonprofits are really worried about this. It's really going to depend what the spread is. If it's 40 states or 35 states, I think it's going to be fine. If it's really close and takes a month afterwards of wrangling like we had in the hanging Chad era of Bush Gore, but in this current political environment, I think all bets are off. So the chances that there will be attempts made to muddy the election are 100%. It's already happening with all the both the attempts to question mail-in voting that's been around since the Civil War, and to say it's rigged and all these other issues, but that we've seen for the last 4 years. So I really think it's going to come down largely to how big the spread is. But every effort to stop people from voting and to make polling places hard to get to and to make people not believe in the United States postal system and all that, every single thing is going to be done, especially because the other things aren't working. Portland didn't work. The Bible in front of the church didn't work. Going against BLM didn't work. All these corporations and all of these, even the military, is voicing opposition to Trump's positions right now. Even Mitch McConnell the other day told senators, if you need to run against the president to win in your district, do it. So you're seeing this huge shift. So when narcissists or people that are attached to their power are cornered by a huge shift like this, they're going to lash out. So I think I put in my newsletter the other day where we reached the 100-day to the election mark. I think even though this seems like it's been a crazy ride, the roller coaster just got lifted to the highest peak of the track at 100 days, and it's going to get more crazy.
So what happens to the United States if Trump wins re-election?
Well, I'm probably a little bit of a contrarian on this. I think that domestically, it would be a disaster, that's for sure. I think domestically, we would be able to overcome that disaster over a certain amount of time. It might take a decade, it might take a generation. Internationally, I think the disaster, which now would probably take that long to overcome, is not going to be overcomable. I don't think America's place in the world will be salvageable if Trump wins again. And I'm not 100% sure it is anyway, because it's not just Trump. There's been a series of events that have led the world to lose faith in America. And this has been, instead of one event, a 4-year event, basically. But if you look at the Iraq War, the self-imposed financial crisis of 2008, and the Trump election, the world was already losing faith in America as a leader that they really could trust to get it right. And now when you take all of Trump's bashing of NATO, love of dictators, and especially the failure, as frustrated and perplexed as we are by the failure around COVID, the rest of the world is just in absolute shock. And it's going to go a long way. It's going to last a long time. So I'm very worried about domestic, but I'm 100 times more worried about what America's role in the world is going to be.
And so what happens to the United States if Biden is elected president?
I mean, there's just a ton of work to do. Internationally, I still think it's going to be a long time, especially when you think about the gutting of certain departments. Like if you take the State Department, for example, the way the State Department basically works is we all hear about the most powerful people and ambassadors and different people that are going around the world, diplomats. But really what the work of the State Department is done by these people who start when they're like 23, 24, and they develop relationships with their counterparts in other countries. And those people like develop these friendships and working relationships over decades. And then when push comes to shove and they're in positions of power, they're really the people who get things done. But the State Department has been so gutted during this that it's going to take a long time to build it back up. And even when we build it back up, it's not with people who have these relationships. So I think it's going to be tricky no matter what. I think this feeling of overwhelming constant politics and news will lift, which in and of itself will be a huge benefit to America. Somebody needs to go to a dinner party and just talk about the latest Brandi Carlile album and stop talking about Trump 24/7. I mean, I used to think I was wasting my time when I would talk about a football game or whatever, but man, this is just crazy. Every conversation is either Trump or the pandemic these days. I think people need a break and think about art and music and friendship and important things. So that alone will be a benefit to America if this ends.
So you have another audience question. I'm a subscriber. I don't have time to read every story. Are they in order of importance? And how do you decide which stories to include?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of stories to include, I really go by my gut of what I'm most interested in that day. I used to try to be exhaustive with the newsletter, but it was too much and it wasn't good. And I realized people have multiple news sources. And I really want to focus this, like I said at the outset, as a column. This is what I'm interested in and what I have something to say or think people should know about. There's a little bit less of an order of things right now because we've moved into this weird time where there's really only one or two stories that anybody's covering. And that's Trump, the election, and COVID, and Black Lives Matter, and things surrounding that. I generally, historically, and still try to lead with something that's more general interest and human interest, something that I have something to say about, maybe that's slightly lighter or more uplifting than the hard news. And the third story is usually where I put something more international that you may not know much about, but that's pretty important to know about. And then from then on, there's really not a ton of order until you get down to 8, 9, and especially 10, where I try to have more fun stuff or more weird stuff. So
like
plenty of people.
That looks like Larry Bird.
Exactly. To me, that used to be the whole newsletter.
Well, what I think was interesting was that, as you said, when you first started Next Draft, it was exhaustive, and it was more the approach of what you should be doing. And then you started tailoring it to what interests you more and what you wanted to do. And then it grew in popularity.
Right. Yeah. No, I think there's probably a lesson in there for sure. I basically just did the newsletter I wanted to read.
Yeah.
And focused on stuff I either had a take about, I thought was important, or I had a joke about, honestly. Sometimes I just pick stories for that. And yeah, that definitely made it better. And until this era, it was really fun because there was such a variety of stories out there. I do get a ton of emails, even from liberals, that say, can you please stop covering so much about COVID and Trump? And I'm like, man, if you can find me another story, please do it. It's like there's nothing. If you look at the biggest stories about Trump and you just do a Google search on that reporter, and you'll see 3 years ago they were working on the State Department or local stories or whatever. Everybody's on the story. So, which is a huge detriment, obviously, to both us as news consumers and to society in general. I mean, there's never been a better time to be a white collar criminal. If you have any aspirations in that area to be either a corrupt government leader or a white collar criminal, you got about 93 days to get it in, because there is no journalist who's going to be tracking you down.
And you still do all the researching yourself, right? You go to 60, 80, 90 sites every day and write it up, and then you run it by, have somebody else read it.
Yeah, I have one friend, my friend Rob, who I grew up with, and we're sort of on a instant messaging type program all day long. He's like my virtual office mate. And he reads each blurb as I do it. And even more importantly, he's like my sort of sounding board and my office friend, you know? So when I get bummed and say, this is all meaningless, why am I wasting my life? He says, all right, next story, dude.
So is it just the two of you?
Yeah.
And then what about marketing, promotion, any of that?
No, I should have all that, but no, it's just all a one man shop. So actually, I mentioned I'm writing a book now. Every book agent that I've talked to brings that up. Like, are you sure you're going to be able to take feedback? You know, publishers like to collaborate. I'm like, I'm not sure, but I'll try.
Well, I was going to ask about, as a writer, how sensitive or receptive are you to criticism, copy editing, rewrites?
Yeah. I don't know yet because I don't get a ton of it, but I think so far I do have an agent now, and all of her feedback has been dead on and really helpful. And I told her, I think the only part that will be hard for me is if somebody tries to rewrite a joke.
Ooh,
because
yeah.
I've been spending my whole life trying to perfect the art of writing jokes into newsletters or text, which is a little bit of a weird, obscure skill. So that I might have a little pushback on, but the rest of it, I'm probably open to. I think it'll probably make me a better writer. I mean, I'm saying that publicly. I'll obviously go smoke a joint on my deck and complain for 2 hours when it actually happens.
Well, you know, writing funny is different than being funny or telling a joke.
Yeah.
And talk about, I mean, there is an art to writing funny. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's mostly just about removing as many barriers as you can by practicing, you know, of writing a ton. Oddly, I think you probably notice that when you're either texting with a friend or emailing with a friend, you're like having these snappy exchanges like in real life, and you go like, God damn, I am hilarious. And so are my friends. Like, why can't anything in movies or life or writing be as funny as us sitting around having a couple beers, getting the rhythm going or the momentum going? So it's really just trying to remove as many barriers and being as free as possible to recreate that, which is pretty impossible to recreate, but you just try to get close to it.
Have you ever thought about either doing stand-up or hosting a current events show, like doing a television or video version of Next Draft?
I've thought about it. I mean, I had a podcast for a while with my friend Phil Bronstein, who used to be the editor of the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, and now runs the Center for Investigative Reporting.
That's not what he's known for. You know what he's known for?
Yeah, that was what most of our off-air.
He was married to Sharon Stone, for those who don't know.
Yeah, that's true. At a time when she had the most popular, well-known private parts in the world.
But he's also a very, very well-respected journalist.
Yeah. He's not listening, so it's okay. But so we had a podcast, and I definitely have thought, I think every day about doing something in video or something in stand-up comedy or whatever. I sort of decided maybe partly just, you know, a little fear or stuck in my ways at my age or whatever. But one of the reasons why I wanted to do a book a little bit more than I wanted to try to do stand-up, and I do once or twice or 3 times a year, I go do talks, and it's pretty much just stand-up comedy. But I do feel that this thing that I've sort of worked on of trying to get serious topics to intermingle with humor in writing is a really sort of a rare thing. I'm not sure if it's marketable. We'll find out when the book comes out. But I want to sort of pursue that more because I think it's more unique. I don't think there's as many, I don't think when I think of comedians or funny stuff as writing, I usually think of comedians. Yeah. So I want to try to bring that to a broader audience with a book, and also to be able to intermingle the weird thing of intermingling like a story about the rise of fascism with a joke. They don't seem like they go together, but it actually makes it easier to accept and absorb the content.
Well, Jon Stewart does it well.
Yeah, yeah. The Daily Show is a great example. Also, obviously, SNL with Weekend Update. Those are definitely stuff that I'm really into for sure.
So this is a two-part question. First of all, you're our go-to for news. Who are your go-tos? And then also, who are your mentors or heroes?
Let's see. My go-tos for news are mostly just sites you would have heard of. I mean, every site and every outlet has its flaws, but I think of all the sites, all the news sites during this era, The Atlantic has probably done the best job.
Yeah.
First, they did the best job of transitioning from being a print publication to the internet era, which many didn't survive and many didn't do well. I mentioned earlier, I was watching the Civil War documentary, Ken Burns documentary with my kids, and they even mentioned, they show a couple Atlantic headlines. So they've been around for a while. But I just think that their stuff blends the perfect sort of mix between news and feature. So it's interesting, but it also features the news you need to know. And they've also just had a series of writers that just have been dead on this whole era. And they might have seemed extreme, and their warnings might have seemed a little bit hysterical 4 years ago, but it just turns out they're dead on. And that goes right up to the pandemic also, where they had a headline that said cancel everything, like in February, back when we were thinking that's crazy and the NBA hadn't canceled and all that. So that's probably my main, if I was going to get hired by a site to write for them or whatever, probably them and the New Yorker I've always loved. And I'm not sure personal heroes, I don't really think of personal heroes in news too much, actually. So, yeah, on that, I'd probably just go back to my parents and the ability to think about this stuff as a person and from a psychological point of view, instead of just absorbing it as it's given to you.
The most important question is, who is your celebrity crush?
Well, my wife and I have a deal that we both have a hall pass, and my hall pass is Beyonce and her hall pass is Beyonce. So we really agree on this one.
And who's your man crush?
I saw that was going to be one of your questions. I thought it would take me a second to think about it, but it's definitely Springsteen. So much so that I honestly hope never to meet him. I definitely hope he will read my stuff. That would be my fantasy, but I don't want to meet him and take the chance that one of us is having a bad day. It's too important a part of my life.
Well, we have a lot of people who work in the music industry who are on this, in this seminar. So tell me a little bit about your musical preferences and also your experiences with investing in music related companies.
Sure. Yeah. I mentioned my friend Rob, who proofreads my stuff. We go to concerts as part of our next draft offsites before the pandemic constantly. I'd say a few times a month. And so it's a pretty wide variety. John Hyatt is probably the person we've seen the most. I'd say we've seen him about 25 times or so. All the babies he used to sing about are now like fully grown adults and have their own music careers. I love Brandy Carlisle. Nashville transplant that I like is Kaleo. They're like a Icelandic band. My favorite live band is probably a band called The Record Company. They're from the Midwest and they're amazing. Their albums are good, but their live is unbelievable. Probably the best 2-string instrumentalist I've seen on stage together live before. Their bass player and lead singer guitarist are just both totally ridiculous. And then I love everything from like Arcade Fire to Run the Jewels. So it's pretty wide variety. And I also, much to the chagrin of my 11-year-old daughter, I love Harry Styles. And I think that Watermelon Sugar High is by so far the song of the summer that it's not even close. If this was not a pandemic summer, that song, it's too happy for a pandemic, but it would be one of the biggest summer songs ever. So I love him. And now that I love him, she hates him.
Did you see Bruce Springsteen on Broadway?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I saw that. Unbelievable. The best thing about actually seeing Bruce Springsteen on Broadway is as an obsessive live music attendee, I care very much about the sound. So even when I take my son, he wants to go to the front or whatever. And I'm like, no, we have to go stand next to the sound guy because the whole room is being tuned to his ear. So that's where we're going to hear it the best, you know? And, but you always hear people talking and people on dates and people living their normal lives. When you're an old man at a concert, you're like, just want to hear the music. So that was the best thing about seeing Springsteen on Broadway, actually, was it was so weird to go to see a rock star in complete silence for the whole song, you know? That was pretty amazing.
So tell me about your investments in music related companies, and also what do people on the business side of the music industry either need to understand about business, or what do they get wrong?
Yeah, well, in the early days, they got most things wrong, but it was hard because the internet sort of went so far ahead of them on music. And it's interesting that music is the most competed over application, I would say, of anything among big and small tech companies. It's pretty amazing that how much people focus on that. And I'm not 100% sure why, because it's an incredibly hard business. Back in the day, I did invest in a company called Sound Flavor, but it was a little early and music rights things weren't worked out. But it was pretty amazing. I remember when I walked in for my first meeting, they had like 52 people with headphones in a basement in complete silence, all listening to songs and describing them on like 32 different characteristics to help you make playlists. So it was sort of like a human algorithm. And that was really cool. The technology was amazing. And it actually ended up being used more by businesses who said like, hey, I want to use Tom Petty for my ad. And then they get the price for a Tom Petty song. And then they go, okay, who sounds like Tom Petty? And they'd say, here's our tool to find that out. Today, I invest in a company called At Venue, which is they handle all the merch sales at shows for big and small bands. So that's probably more in the area where I'd have the courage to re-enter the music space at this point, because it's so dominated by big players. I think Spotify is really, like them or don't like them, you have to give them an incredible credit for withstanding. They withstood the onslaught of Apple, Google, Amazon, all these huge companies that have the biggest audiences in the world went out to destroy them and take their business, and they're still huge. It might be something about that indie feeling of music that you're like, I'd just rather be on a brand that doesn't feel like one of the giants, even though they are huge now. But one thing about music, I think that of all things to create a user interface for music apps are the hardest. I usually focus on product when I advise companies or whatever. And I was probably going about 3 days a week at this company that had this app called Sound Flavor. And I think that's the hardest challenge. There's so many variables of how people listen to music. I want to save it to my favorites. I want to save it to a playlist. I want to like it, but I don't want to save it. I want to listen to it, but I don't want my friends or followers to know I'm into this music. I mean, there's just so many millions of little variables. But the one thing I think all of the brands are missing, actually, is I'm a huge Sirius XM fan and a huge Howard Stern fan, but I love having a DJ. I don't love commercials, but I love having a DJ just give me a quick update on here's who the band is, here's how we found them, we're going to play them over and over a little bit, which might be irritating if you'd had no other choices like the early days of radio, but you have to listen to a band a few times to really connect and see if you're into it when you're just driving around and talking and thinking about other things. So I think that's the biggest missed opportunity. If I was put as CEO of Spotify or ran one of those big music sites, I would copy Sirius XM and have DJ-led stations. I think having a curator like what I do for news, for music, is a totally valuable thing. And I don't think people would mind it. They'd mind it if they're just working or having it playing in their cafe. But the rest of the time, I love Madison from Alt Nation. She shouted out my son for his bar mitzvah. It was a huge moment in our family. So I just like those characters, and I like having a host.
Tell me about the business model of Next Draft. How do you make money? Do you have sponsors or paid subscribers, and where do you see it in 5 years?
Sure. I do make money. I've always had one sponsor. My current sponsor is Mozilla, the makers of Firefox. When the pandemic hit, and they're just all of my sponsors over the years. WordPress was a sponsor, and Salesforce was a sponsor. Usually, I don't do deals for shorter than a year because it's just me, and I don't want to be selling ads. But they've all been totally generous, and I make more than the average journalist from Next Draft for sure. So it's been really great. As soon as the pandemic hit, I decided that it would be more useful to use the ad space in Next Draft for causes related to the moment that I thought were valuable. So I started with something called the crisis text line, where people can text if they're in some kind of crisis and get help. My wife and I did a big program where we sold shirts that had Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, because that was one of the first things the Trump administration canceled, is putting Harriet Tubman on the 20. And so we raised a bunch of money for Donors Choose. We sold about 2,000 shirts. And that money went to Donors Choose, and eventually to classrooms where Black history or Black literature was being taught. And then currently it's actually Stop Hate for Profit. I'm working with the ADL and got that out on there because I just think it's important that we corral that in. So as long as the pandemic's going on, I made two changes. I made it nonprofit and I made it 7 days a week. So I'll probably stick with that.
We have a couple of things in common. First of all, we both love Safari. Is
Yes,
that still what you use?
Absolutely.
Okay, and why?
Well, I use it. I only use a web browser for one thing, because I don't use any tools like RSS, because I want to see where the managing editors of newspapers choose to put their stories, because they're making choices there to make it easier for me. And I know at this point, I know exactly before the page loads where my eye is going to be. I love Safari the most because I just like the clean look of it. And I'm an Apple fanatic even now, although I have been since nobody used it. And the main reason though is because they have this feature called Reading List, where you can add a story with one click to the reading list, and it goes into a sort of a left column of the browser that's closed. And then when you open it up, you see those stories. So I put everything in that reading list that I'm considering for that day. And then as I write about those stories, I delete them and then move on to the next one. So it's just easy for my rhythm.
And you're also a fan of emails,
Yeah.
as am I. So tell us how to write a good email that will be read, understood, and not deleted.
Yeah, well, you want to usually have a pretty good subject line, but not too clickbaity that somebody's going to be mad when they open it. I mean, you want to get to the point as quickly as possible. Honestly, mine, if you were doing a seminar on newsletters, mine is probably a little too long and a little too text heavy, but that's my brand and that's what I like. I like writing. So, but yeah, I'm definitely a huge fan of email. But if you're just sending an email or doing a marketing email, you want to make it as short as possible and get to the point, and especially the call to action. I'm on the board of a few nonprofits, and they'll tell like 42 stories, and at the bottom of the email, it'll say, please donate. It's like, nobody has time for that. They're going to donate because their friend told them to donate. Put the donate link at the top. And if they want to read, they can read, but put what you want most, what them to know most or do most at the top. But my favorite thing, really, a lot of people, I've thought a lot about what makes email work because I've been doing newsletters and why it's the killer app still after all these years. But I really think ultimately it's both two things. One is that it's personal. So when you get my newsletter, it's coming in next to an email from your mom or your friend. So it's more personal, and people hit reply. They can hit reply and say what they want to me, which is for both good and bad. And so it's personal, but also it's the last feed that you have 100% control over. You know, there's so many arguments about how Facebook's algorithm should control your feed and what Twitter should list first and what ads you see. But email is just the one thing now that spam is pretty much under control. You create that feed, you control it 100%. And I think that's why it's going to be around for a while.
All right, you got a question from a viewer. I know you already spoke about this earlier, but I'm still intrigued about the discussion surrounding the TikTok app. I was just on a downtown music webinar last week listening to lawyer Tracy Gardner, head of label licensing and partnerships at TikTok, and heard a different reaction in that group regarding this app. Are your final thoughts to stay away from that due to security concerns?
Well, full disclosure, my daughter is probably TikToking right now. So I don't think it's necessarily urgent. Somebody did a study recently to see if there were any backdoors into TikTok. They did find some in Android. They did not find any on iPhone. I mean, there's a million ways you can be sharing your information if the Chinese are trying to surveil us, right? Chips that are made in China might have backdoors, just like ours do that we sell around the world, motherboards. There's so many ways. So I don't think it's necessarily an urgent thing. And it's especially not an urgent thing because this deal with Microsoft is probably going to get done anyway. I just wanted to mention earlier that I do know people who work in defense or at the CIA, and their message as friends is always like, you probably want to keep your kid away from TikTok. But I drive a Volvo, and that's made by the Chinese or owned by the Chinese. I have a DJI drone that I fly around my neighborhood that's made in China, and my daughter's using TikTok. So I'm basically a Chinese secret agent at this point. So I'm certainly not telling people what they should or shouldn't do. And I'm sure that people who are working to make TikTok US a fun and cool environment or whatever are as well-meaning, certainly as any other social media employees.
And the final question, what is your superpower?
I guess my superpower is what you asked about earlier. My superpower is to only with my mind absorb disparate pieces of information and synthesize them and then spit them out in a way that's either informative or entertaining to people. I'd say that's probably without feeling too much and getting too depressed about it. So that's probably it. Making connections between different pieces of information, and then especially these days, not letting that just make me want to crawl into a hole.
And your laser-like focus. That's a superpower.
Yeah, I actually don't have that much focus. I do the work, but I'm tweeting the whole time. And I tried to write my book in one of those apps that keeps you out of distraction, and I had like 0 words after 2 hours. And then I opened everything back up and started tweeting and emailing, and then it started pouring out. So I write better and think better distracted at this point.
Dave, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this, and I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Hey, let me echo those thank yous. First off, Dave and Beverly, you both are extraordinary journalists, and we continue to ask you to keep fighting the good fight in this time when seemingly some leaders are against you. So please keep doing it. Dave, I'd say your superpower is making people laugh. Every day when I open your newsletter, I laugh out loud at least once or twice reading the lead-ins. I don't even read the articles half the time. I just read the lead-ins. So
you're my ideal reader.
Well, I'm easy. And folks, I hope that you've enjoyed this as much as I have. I hope you are now hip to Dave Pell and his Next Draft blog. And I want to thank you for being here and continuing to support us. On Thursday, you see on my screen, I'm going to have 2 more rock stars here. I'm going to have Portia Sabin, who is the president of the Music Business Association, being interviewed by another one of my heroes, Cameo Carlson. So you'll want to tune into that. Lastly, let me remind all of us to please wear one of these. It's not a big deal, and it's really important. If you want to get back to live music soon, put on a mask. Please do so. Be safe, folks, and thanks again, Dave and Beverly.
Thank you. Great talking to you.